Have you ever seen something growing up in your hometown and you've always sort of wondered about it but never really knew much about it? I've lived in Laconia all my life, and one thing that I always saw driving through downtown was the Colonial Theater. It was always old and broken down. I knew next to nothing about it except for the fact that it had been unused for years and used to show plays and cinematic films. My father could tell you stories about the times he saw the matinees when tickets were 50 cents a piece and the theater was bustling with patrons, but that was before my time. Recently, however, I heard that the city was making plans to renovate and reopen the theater. For one of my college classes, I was assigned to make a documentary about some place or something, and after worrying over whether I could take on this rather ambitious idea for a project, I decided to go ahead and try it. I sent one simple email and it all went uphill from there. I got to interview one of the architects, a local historian of Laconia, and I even got to see the inside of the Colonial Theater itself.
It was designed in 1913 by semi-local architect from Concord, George Griffin. And it was designed for Benjamin Piscopo. Benjamin Piscopo was an Italian immigrant from the Naples area, and he migrated here to America, where he first landed in Boston, and he opened several hotels that he managed. And then he had summered up here in the Lakes region for some time and decided to move his family up here, and he commissioned a 1,400-seat theater to be built here in the city, really trying to dedicate the theater to his homeland, which brings a lot of the Italian decorations to reason. You know, that's really what generated his thought of having George Griffin design it in a semi-Italian-esque theme. It did open a year after it was designed, so in 1914. April 14th was its opening night, and it really completely changed the mindset and the energy that was in the Lakes Region community. And I do mean Lakes Region. It had an impact greater than just in Laconia, because you know, the lakes have always been a destination for people in the New England area and beyond for summer recreation. And this just gave them another event to take part in, especially in the evenings.
As a kid, I used to go to the Colonial all the time, so I remember it as the big theater in town. We had two. We had the Gardens Theater across the street, which is where the kids went most of the time. And we had the Colonial, which was where the first-run pictures and the adults went. And of course, as you grow older, you went to the Colonial. It opened as not only a movie theater, but a legitimate theater, which means plays, concerts. They even had the high school graduation there for a number of years, because the old Laconia High School, which is on Academy Square, is now the Laconia District Court building, and it didn't have a suitable auditorium, so they used the Colonial Theater. During World War II, there was a lot of industrial war production. There were 3 shifts, at least at Scott and Williams, meaning people were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The only day they took off during World War II was Christmas Day. The movie theaters opened in the middle of the night to show movies to the people that were on the earliest shifts. Colonial, of course, being a beautiful building, it was fun to go there.
It was a vaudeville theater performance, so you know, they had a lot of plays, musical performances at the beginning, and that was really what drew people here, and it just kept getting more and more success. It was, you know, really heavy in the vaudeville theatrical performances for the first 10 to 15 years, and then around 10 years it started switching to single-screen cinema. It had this integration of both, but it really just played off of the demand of what people wanted to experience and how they wanted to recreate and experience the area.
In the early years of the Colonial Theater, through the 1930s, vaudeville and plays, the Barnstormers came down and played at the Colonial Theater. Their name means to go around from one area to another. So the Colonial was one of the places that they did come. There were the high school graduations for quite a period of time. There were also cooking shows sponsored by the Laconia Evening Citizen. So they would set up a kitchen on the stage, and a so-called expert would come in from somewhere and be the guest chef for the day. These things would run 2 or 3 days, and at the end, the local appliance dealers would raffle off a refrigerator, a stove, this kind of thing. So there were those. There was some political events. In the 1950s, there were a series of town meetings of the world, which brought in some folks from the United Nations in New York, and then local people from the entire area would come in, and there would be discussions of world affairs and this sort of thing.
In the 80s, the theater was split into 5 different divisions to make it into a cinema, but a lot of people were not happy with the change. It left them wondering why.
The biggest reason was economy. They were tanking financially with only operating one cinema, and this was actually a trend seen across America in the 80s. That we had these beautiful historic theaters that traditionally showed one movie. And they were either having to permanently close or get torn down because they couldn't be maintained. So at that time, the owners, the Baldys, made the decision to divide it into 5 theaters.
Movie industry changed over the years, and it seemed that there was a larger market for a smaller auditorium. So that's why they opted to make initially 4 and then later 5 smaller theaters. People who remember the beauty of the original theater were not happy at all.
The division was met with mixed reviews. Some people appreciated the fact that they divided it in such a way that at least the original architecture would be preserved, but for others it didn't feel right. For them, it was like tearing and crumpling up a favorite piece of artwork. One could smooth out the pieces and tape them back together, but it wasn't truly the same as before.
It certainly was met with a lot of community gripe. It was not a favored move. That doesn't mean, like, people still enjoyed the theater for until 2000 when the theater closed. So it was still very much a part of the community, and those growing up in the 80s, you talk to them and they still remember going to see some of their favorite movies at the theater. So it did still have a positive impact, and even though dividing it destroyed some of the historic integrity of the building, the Baldys really made sure to preserve the actual backbone of the theater. There's a lot of the decoration that was taken down, but taken down relatively gently, so that we have examples that can be recreated. It had to be done. It was an unfortunate thing that even the Baldys were a little skeptical of doing, in different interviews and stuff that we've researched. They weighed their options, and this was the one that they had to move forward with.
By the time I was old enough to attend and appreciate the theater myself, it had been closed since the early 2000s, and since then has occurred quite a bit of damage over the years of no maintenance.
In some respects, there's a lot of pockets, some much worse than others. There's water damage, more specifically in areas where the roof kind of slopes in together to a really tight joint, and that's been opened over the years. Plus the building's had no heat in it since it closed, so that all works, in an expansion-contraction kind of method, which causes ice. There's a lot of paint flaking. There's mold everywhere, especially under the stage, where there's still a lot of moisture and the darkness, and that just makes a bad environment or good environment for mold bad for us. The main theater space itself we kind of went through a phase 1 demolition, which allowed us to remove the 5 cinemas, allowing us to get in there and document like crazy, so that we can really make sure and bring it back to life. It really hasn't preserved anything, but it hasn't fully destroyed everything. So it's not the best atmosphere, but when we've had conservationists and preservationists come in and tour the space, they've marked how really pristine it actually is, especially when you compare it to other theaters of its age and its predicament of being closed and just left alone. There are theaters in much worse. So we're lucky in that respect.
While there have been plans to renovate the theater, one of the things one wonders is, how are they going to do it?
That was a question that really was on our mind from day one, of how do we bring this gem of our city back to its glory. And it's not in a full restoration. We're not going back to April 14th, 1914. We're going back to really, if we were to pinpoint an exact date we're kind of bringing it back to, it would be around the 30s. A lot of the gilding and the painting in the theater, we documented that, and we're able to bring it back to the 1930s paintings that were not very far off from the original coloring. When the theater opened in 1914, there were 1,400 seats. When the theater will be fully renovated and opened again, there will be 750 seats. So essentially half of the original occupancy can fit in there. And that's due to just modern day theatrical seating design and layout, accompanied to an extent with code regulations. It's been fantastic in really being able to see this, really the whole story of the theater, and being able to work with this great team to hone in on the perfect time frame that we can restore the historical areas to. We'll be starting towards the beginning of next year, so 2018, January time frame. And the construction timeline will be roughly around a year, and that includes everything. So by 2019, spring of 2019, we should be fully back in operation and welcoming all of the community into the space through efforts that has brought the budget up to $17 million. But that's an all-inclusive, so that includes the purchase of the property, that includes all the fees associated. I see the theater as a prominent spoke on the wheel of Laconia's success. In a way, it's almost that piece that's been broken, that now we're fixing it and we can get things going again.
I think in its new incarnation, once it gets restored and gets opened as a municipal space, it can be used for all kinds of things: concerts, plays, programs, lectures. There are all kinds of things it can be used for. So I'm confident it will have a rebirth, and we're looking forward to that.
The process to restore this theater will definitely take some time, but so far it's looking hopeful. They're estimating for a release hopefully around early 2019, and I, for one, can't wait to see that happen. If you would like to donate to help restore the theater, you can visit the official website at 609mainstreet.org. Thank you so much, everyone who has helped me out and made this possible, and thanks for watching.